Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
The story.
I kept quiet, played dead, and they buried and left. So after they left, I decided to pray. Praying the best prayer I've ever known, but crying at the same time and wondering even if somebody will ever even hear me. But God made it possible.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Colefax. Welcome to The Story. Well, today we have part 2 of Frida Umuhoza sharing how she miraculously escaped from the 1994 genocide against her Tutsi people in Rwanda. Frida is the author of the book Chosen to Die, Destined to Live. When we ended last time, sadly, all of Frida's family had been killed and Frida was left to die in a ditch. Then she called out for help. Now here's more of Frida sharing her story with Eric Scatterbo in our Melbourne studios.
God made it possible and brought the lady that was picking bananas in that area, who was a neighbor to my grandpa, and heard me scream and praying. But she ran thinking, it's a ghost. So she ran of fear and she went and told someone. And the person she was talking to is a guy who actually worked for my grandfather. And he said, sometimes they bury people alive. It must be someone who's still alive. But she says, but it's somebody, that voice has been screaming since morning at 3. It can't possibly be someone who's still alive until then, because now it's in the afternoon.
Oh, wow.
And so he says, I'll still go check. So he comes and finds me alive and takes me out of the ditch. Very long story short, then this lady ends up taking me for a few hours. And then the following day, I was then hidden by another neighbor who was a Hutu. And I was at his place probably 3 or 4 weeks until the RPF, took over my village. During all those times that I was at his house, so during the night, because during the night they would search into other Hutus' homes to see if there are no hiding people. So he made a deal with me. During the night, I would sleep outside. He dug a small ditch in his banana plantation. He says, you can't stay the night in the house because they come and search in the homes. So I'll be putting you outside during the night, and then during the day you can come in the house. So all those 4 weeks, 3-4 weeks, I was sleeping outside during the night in the ditch, and he'll put, banana leaves and grass on top of me, and then in the morning he'll bring me into the house. But during that time, I think I was just surviving. I didn't allow myself to feel. I didn't allow myself to even feel the pain of losing my family. It was just like I was numb. And
yeah, you must have been in shock.
Yeah, sometimes I'll tell myself, this has not happened. What I've seen maybe I'm going crazy. Maybe it's a nightmare and I will wake up. This is not happening. And another time I would just try to kind of anyways, at the end of that time when the village has been rebuilt and taken over, then I was taken to the refugee, so to speak, like a refugee, a place where they will put survivors. And that was the time that I cried. When I looked around, I knew nobody, and I knew I'm not going to have a family. I knew it wasn't a nightmare. I knew that I had to accept that what I had seen was real. It wasn't...
You were the only survivor in your family.
I was the only survivor of my family. And that's the day that I allowed myself to cry. Literally, like breaking down. And I was then taken in by a lady who was taking in few orphans. And then my mom's brother, who was in Burundi, came searching in different places looking for a survivor. So during that time, you would hear, oh, so-and-so has survived, your cousin has survived, or your auntie has survived. So I was then told that my dad's cousin also survived, who had 4 children, and she took me in.
So now at this point, the killing is over.
The killing is over.
The Tutsi army has liberated your area.
Yes.
So there's some peace in the area?
Yep. Peace and fear and trauma and bombs going off from place to place because remember
it's still going on.
Yeah, when the Hutu soldiers left, they left bombs in different places.
Mines.
So mines. And so there is peace, there's hope that is starting to come in, but there's also so much fear and there's so much desperation of what am I gonna do with my life? Life has no sense whatsoever, and there's so much loss. You can't think of the future. At that moment, I wasn't thinking of the future. You just think of the hour that you're living. You're just in a
just trying to get by day to day, or hour by hour.
Yeah, and then was adopted. A few months later, I was adopted by a family that lived outside the country because my uncle who had me decided, maybe the best thing to help this kid is to get her out of this country. So he sent me to his cousin who lived in Gabon to be adopted. But the trauma was very, very heavy on me. So even when I lived in Gabon with the family, I remember screaming in the night because of the nightmares and flashbacks and just crying every day. In the school where I was, nobody understood me. Nobody understood what I was going through. And so up until when I was 18, it was pretty dark time for me. I didn't make enough friends in school. I was pretty, angry all the time and really in a bad mood all the time because not only did I go back with the family that adopted me, decided to go back to Rwanda. So I had to go back to the same school that I was at before the genocide, which meant then you're sitting with the Hutu children. So I had a lot of bitterness and a lot of trauma. And during the night, I remember everybody would go to sleep in that boarding school and I would just be crying with so much pain of how do I, why am I even in school? There's that much depression as a teenager and not able to even speak. Right now I'm telling my story and I've told my story several times, but during that time I couldn't put it in words. I couldn't even tell my own family how they killed my mom and my brothers. I couldn't say it. I was just internalizing everything. But when I turned 18, like I said, my grandpa was the wonderful Christian I've ever known in my entire life. And so I kept going to church, even with that much hatred and with that much depression and that trauma, but I didn't believe in God. I just went because of my grandpa, but I didn't really
just out of respect for him.
Yeah, but I had no faith. But at 18, through a friend, I came to know Christ personally. And during the time that I was searching to why am I alive and to there was something missing. There was that, what is it? And so I saw her. She came into my school. She was new in my school. And I saw her with a Bible and singing all the time. And just by looking at her, I knew she had something that I wanted, but I didn't know what it was. So I went to her. I said, what is it that you have? Because I want it. And so she didn't say much. She said, will you come with me to the lunch hour fellowship where I go during the lunch time? And I went with her the following day. And right there, the preacher that was preaching on that day, it was like he knew my whole entire story and talked about like it was I was the only person in that room. And I knew God was speaking to me. I knew God was calling me out. And that was the day that I gave my life to Jesus. And from that night, I remember going back home smiling, like really completely changed. And even my mother, my adopted mother, she saw me. She said, what's going on? What has happened? And I said to her, I received the thing. She goes, what thing? I said, Christ. And I started telling her, I now understand why God saved me. I understand why he picked me out of that ditch. He saved my life for a purpose, and I'm going to serve him. Because in my prayer during the time that I was praying in the ditch, I said, Lord, if you ever save me, I'll serve you all the days of my life. But instead of fulfilling my promise, or it's not really a promise, but instead of doing what I prayed for after that, I was very angry. And I felt like my anger was justified. But that day, that's when I remembered my prayer that I prayed in the ditch. And so I said to her, I now know that God saved my life for a purpose, for a reason. And I have to speak his miracles. He brought me back to speak his miracles. And it was from that time my life was changed. But not to say that everything was fixed. I had to deal with a lot of hatred that I had been carrying for all those years. And I felt like I had pretty good reasons to hate the Hutus. I had pretty good reasons to hate the people who killed my family. And so...
And you're living with them now.
And I'm living with them now. I'm going to school with them. And so I just felt like my relationship with God is not going to go anywhere until I let God take this hatred out of my heart. And even then, to even accept that I do have that hatred in my heart and that it's wrong to have that hatred instead of justifying it. And it was a pretty hard and tough journey. And I asked people to pray for me and asked few friends. But I told them, but I have pretty good reasons because some of them knew what I had gone through. And I wouldn't stand a preacher who came to that lunch hour fellowship talking about forgiveness because the examples they were giving has nothing close to losing a whole family in one day.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, yeah, I understand, but there's no way that I can forgive people who haven't even asked for forgiveness. But I knew I was doing it for me. You know, somebody said forgiveness is a gift that you give to yourself. And hatred is like drinking poison and expect your enemy to die. And so I knew that I had come to a point where my relationship with God, for it to grow and to get moving and to go to that place where I'm talking about, I have to proclaim the victory and the miracles of God in my life. I knew I wouldn't go with the baggage of hating the Hutus and not allowing myself to be used of God. And so it was a hardest journey. And I remember praying and saying, Lord, I really, really want to do this, but I don't even know where I can start because they haven't asked me for forgiveness. And even if I forgive them, it's not going to bring my family back. There's no way. But I remember hearing the Lord talking to me and saying, just let me do it in your heart. And I knew from that time my responsibility was to just allow God to work through my heart and to surrender.
You're listening to The Story. Today our guest once again is Frida Umuhoza, who's sharing what happened in her life after she survived the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi people in Rwanda. We'll hear more of her story and how she was finally able to forgive the perpetrators when we return.
If this program has highlighted something you'd like prayer for, we'd love to pray for you. Call 1-800-PRAY-FOR-ME. That's 1-800-772-936. It's a free call. Or text 0401 132 888.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Colefax, and this is The Story. Today, our guest once again is Frida Umuhoza, who's the author of the book Chosen to Die, Destined to Live, about her miraculous escape from the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi people in Rwanda. Frida's been sharing about what happened in her life after she was the only survivor in her family. Now, she tells about her difficult journey to forgiving the perpetrators.
I'm a confrontational person, so to speak. And that's a good thing. Sometimes it's a very bad thing. But then you go to a point where I'm like, I have to face these people because they are still monsters in my head. But to resolve this, I have to see their faces. I have to come face to face with them and declare forgiveness and declare that I've forgiven them, but also to take all that power that they had over my life to take it back for myself.
So they were living in your neighborhood?
Some of them were in jail, but their families were still in the neighborhood.
Okay, so not the actual perpetrators, the murderers.
Yes,
but
in jail.
But their family were in your neighborhood.
Yes. So I took a bus and I went to jail. And I was living in Kigali by then, and I went back into my village and I went to jail I went with my cousin because I didn't want to go by myself. But
you're going to see the
killer, the person who killed my father, and that I was told that he had been captured and he's in that jail. And I'm putting a face on to say, I'm going to see him. And this is not something that I will, advise everybody to do if really you are not up to it, because it can be re-traumatizing. It can be really confronting. It can be triggering and really bad if you're not ready.
Yeah.
And that's what happened on that first visit for me. I saw this man, and the moment they brought him out, I just felt so much anger, so much fear, and so much terror, because the image that I had of him is him coming to my house with a machete. So even though he had his hands folded this time and he's in jail, in my head he still had that same power of a killer over me. And I just couldn't even shake hands with him. So I remember going back home, crying on the bus and saying, Lord, you're asking something impossible of me.
Was he repentant?
He didn't look repentant at all. He actually looked like he despised me. And I went back home, and again, I took a few months in between and praying and fasting and asking the Lord, I really want to do this, and I want to be able to go to bed not fearing that I will be killed or anything. And the more I prayed, the more I asked for God's grace, the more peace that came in my heart. And then a few months later, I again asked my cousin to go back with me. And he was like, well, the last time we went, it didn't go well. I'm like, this time I'm ready. I want to go see him. So I went and I told him, I said, I'm sure you don't even remember me, but I told him who I was. And I said, I know that you killed my dad. Because my dad wasn't with us, he was on the roof, and he offered himself to be killed later on. And I said to him, I'm here because Jesus has changed my heart, and I'm here to declare that I have forgiven you, and that I'm here to tell you that the same grace that I've received from God is the same grace that God can extend to you no matter what. Now, when you talk about forgiveness and confronting the killers, sometimes it brings a lot of discussion, even among ourselves as survivors. And I can understand that. And that's not to despise what we've been through. And that's not to tell that every survivor has to do that. But I did it for me. And just the moment that I did that, and that I was able to shake hands with him, and that I was able to look at him in the eyes, it was more like taking the keys of him controlling my emotions and controlling the person that I am. And I didn't feel like that little kid that he had the power over. I felt like this time I'm a woman in control. And
interesting. So forgiving kind of helps you feel more in control.
Yes.
You're not a victim anymore.
Yes. And I remember leaving that jail. I just felt so much peace and so much freedom in my heart, because I didn't look at him in the eyes of hatred. And something else is that the hatred, what it does to you is that it also puts you in a position of where you feel like you have the power over that person as well, and you're not. And the other thing is the forgiveness, once you forgive that person, is giving you more, it's like opening a door to your own healing, to start a journey of healing, versus when I was closed behind those prison of hatred. It was more like I wasn't going anywhere. And so I left him in jail and went now to the village, to my home. For the first time, I was able to go to my village and go to my demolished home, and went the next door to the neighbors, and one by one. And I can say that trip, for me as a survivor, that trip, I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a survivor, and a survivor with a purpose. And from that day on, Doesn't mean that everything is perfect with me. I don't have bad days. I don't have days when I feel,
Well, the traumas
down, or
gotta
the
be
troubles,
still
or
there.
the pain of losing my family. But I've chosen to remember my family without hatred. Yes, with the sense of loss, but without hatred. And that's what I knew that's what I want to pass on to the next generation, to my children, and to anybody else that I would be able to speak to. And then from then, I was able to actually, for the first time, I was able to tell my story. I was able to now speak up about what had happened to me. And from that time to this day, I still share my story.
Yeah, speaking of that, now you've shared your story to the UN.
Yes.
And in other conferences.
Yes. And that's mostly during those times that I've shared my stories. It's during our Kwibuka. Kwibuka is remember. We have commemoration of loved ones every year. And I also have chosen, not only do I choose to speak to bring hope to the world, but I also have chosen to speak because the genocide deniers, people who deny that what happened to my family, what happened to my people, who tried to deny what has happened during those 100 days, 1 million Tutsis were killed. And during that time, those 3 months, it's a very short time, but a big amount of people. And so survivors like me who have no families left, or even survivors who still suffer psychologically and emotionally and still live with the trauma 25 years on. You speak to a lot of survivors. There's still a lot to be done. And there's still a lot to be done in that community of survivors, and people still suffer. And the more time goes on, the more you understand the gravity of it. I can speak for myself.
Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time, but what would you say is the main thing that you want our listeners to know about your experiences?
The story of hope. If I could do it. I don't know what you're going through. It might be a divorce. It might be a broken marriage, broken home, and anything that brings despair. But if God picked me up, it's because I allowed and surrendered. So if a situation like mine that was so hopeless, if God can work in that situation, He can work in any situation. So it's bringing hope. It's trying to be an ambassador of hope and forgiveness to yourself, to the family member that you haven't been speaking to for years and years, and that will give you freedom and a start of a healing journey. And forgiveness is a journey.
Frida, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you.
That was Eric Scatterbo chatting with Frida Umuhoza, who's the author of the book Chosen to Die, Destined to Live, about her miraculous escape from the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi people in Rwanda. To find out more about Frida and her book, her website is frida.net.au. That's Frida, Frida.net.au. Well, what an amazing story she has to share, one that is almost unimaginable to have gone through. Frida is just one of many survivors of the 1994 genocide, and many, like Frida, have turned to God to give them a hope and a future after going through so much darkness. We pray that God will continue to minister to them and to heal their emotional scars. And as we heard Frida say, a big part of her healing was finally being able to forgive her perpetrators. As it says in the Bible, forgive as the Lord forgave you. This, of course, is not always easy, especially after going through something as horrific as what Frida has gone through, but with the Lord's help, it can be done. And Frida will be the first one to tell you that forgiveness is essential for moving on and healing from past traumatic experiences. Well, how about you? Is there somebody you're struggling to forgive? And you'd like to pray with someone perhaps about this? Our prayer line is 1-800-PRAY-FOR-ME. That's 1-800-772-936. And we'd love to pray for you on that line, 1-800-772-936. Well, thanks for joining us for part 2 of Frida's powerful story. I'm Jimmy Colefax, encouraging you to share your story with someone today.
Next time on The Story.
We took the door off the side so I could hang out of the side of the helicopter. They tied me in with a rope. It wasn't equipped with a real professional rig. I didn't realize, though, there was a loop in the rope we had forgotten about. And so when we took off, we headed out over Kingston Bay, and he turned really sharp to turn toward the stadium, and I literally went out of the helicopter and had my feet on the little runners down there, but I was dangling by this rope, and all I could think of at the time was keep the shot in focus.
Phil Cook is an American Christian media consultant and founder of his own production company called Cook Pictures. He'll share his story and what it's like to be a Christian in Hollywood next time.
The Story. Just another way Vision is connecting faith to life.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.